Good morning, my friends. Thanks for tuning in today. This is Friday Reflections. My name is Peter Bolland. So great to be with you as it is every Friday when we gather together here for our curious little 30-minute weekly check-in. It's been a big week, and I know you keep track of everything like I do and think about things all the time like I do. And this program has become a real island of sanity for me to get a chance to be with so many of you every Friday on a kind of just regular, consistent basis and think through some sometimes difficult things and also some beautiful things and share a little poetry and share a little reflection. It feels a little bit to me like a prayer, the work that we do together here. And I don't know if it's evolved since we started last June or if it was always a little bit like that. I think it's a little bit of both. But I first always want to start with just an expression of really deep gratitude that so many of you have chosen to make this a regular part of your week and of your pandemic isolation. And I so appreciate the email that I get sometimes from folks talking about certain things that I shared, or a poem that I read, or some thoughts that we worked through, and how it's come to your assistance really in your own navigation of these choppy waters that we're all in. So thank you so much for your patronage and your membership here at San Diego Oasis. And thanks to everyone at San Diego Oasis who builds this platform for us to have these gatherings in. A lot of love and gratitude to go around, and everybody gets some. You get some and you get some. So let me make a quick plug. I don't have a webinar next week, but the week after that on March 23rd, a brand new webinar called American Buddha, The Wisdom of Walt Whitman. So there we get a chance to dive into one of America's greatest and certainly most influential poets. He kind of broke the mold. You know, he left behind what a lot of the great poets of his day were doing, Longfellow and all those folks with their long kind of epic poems with lots of end rhymes. You know, he didn't invent free verse, but he put free verse on the map without end rhymes, with internal rhymes. We'll get into some of that kind of technical stuff, but mostly I want to kind of mine Walt Whitman's poetry for wisdom, for his incredible insight, for his spirituality, for his philosophy, because I think, as many have said, he is kind of our American Buddha. You know, he champions awakening. And what does that mean exactly for Whitman? So that's what we're doing 2 weeks from now. And there's the link. Thank you, Kristen. There's the link in the chat if anybody wants to click on that right now or save it for later. But I know a lot of you are already registered. The numbers are really strong in that webinar. But I didn't want to get through this gathering without mentioning that is coming up. Just booked a bunch of new exciting content with Brandon. So we're going to keep the train rolling here. We're going to meet every Friday for the foreseeable future. And I'm going to do at least 2 webinars a month. Those are always on Tuesdays at from 10 to 11:30. And I get this question a lot, and that is, I can't make that time. I'm busy. I'm working or whatever. No worries. Register for the webinar anyway if you're interested, because every paid registrant will receive a link to a YouTube video, an unregistered YouTube video of the webinar. So you won't be there to ask questions during the Q&A because you won't be there live, but you will get to experience the whole thing. All right. And also, if you ask me, I'll send you the PowerPoint. So you can have those 2 things. Even if you can't attend live, consider joining us anyway. All right. Great. So let me tell you a story about something Lori and I saw in one of our walks around Lake Murray. This is a few months ago. We walked there every day, and most of the time twice a day, and head down to the lake, and we'll just walk along the shore and see what we see and be out under the sky and all that beautiful stuff, clean up after our dog. You know, we say it's for him, but it's really for us that he takes us on a walk. You know how it is. So one day, Lori and I went walking along the shore of Lake Murray, and we saw a man up ahead on the trail right on the shore fishing, which you often see there. Yeah. but he had set his rod down and it was leaning against something, and he was, for lack of a better word, attacking a tiny tree. So, there's eucalyptus trees all around us in California. I got a bunch growing out behind my house. They're non-native trees. They're from Australia. They were brought here by early ranchers, and they're pretty good at blocking the wind, and they grow quick, and they like our arid, no rain environment. And so lots of eucalyptus trees in our lives here in San Diego. And there are along the shore of Lake Murray, lots of eucalyptus trees in certain areas, especially. And there are lots of little new ones, little 5-footers, little 10-footers, little sapling trees. He was basically attacking about a 6-foot tall eucalyptus tree. He was bending the trunk in half, and the trunk was only, about that big around. And he was wrestling with it, trying to snap that tree in two. And he succeeded right as we came up to him. He broke this tree, broke it off, leaving a stump about 3-4 feet off the ground. And then he hung his jacket on it. And I'm walking up going, who is murdering this tree and why? And then just to hang a jacket on when there's already some horizontal branches like right next to him that he could have hung his jacket over. So I see this and I have my first glance, my first gaze reactions. It's enraging, right? I don't say a thing because he's given off this kind of crazy vibe. Like, I just got out of prison and I like to fight. and so Lori and I gave him all kind of a wide berth. We went around him, but inside I'm kind of seething. I'm like, who does that? Who just destroys a living thing? I would argue a conscious thing, an aware thing. Trees are amazing, right? They communicate with each other through the air, through pheromones, and they communicate through their roots. We've all heard the stories about, birch trees in the forest. When one of them gets infested by a kind of insect, all the birch trees for 10 miles around begin producing an enzyme that repels that insect. It's like trees are talking to each other all the time, just because they move slow and we can't hear their voices. So this is like a murder and so unnecessary, right? And in the coming days, because like I said, we walk there every day, I never saw that guy again. But every day I walked down there was another tree and another tree and another tree and another tree snapped off at about chest height. And it was dispiriting. It was disheartening to see that kind of senseless loss of life forms. I get it. If you got to haul fish out of the lake, that's one thing. I respect people's freedom to interact with nature as they see fit, but this crossed a line for me. This is weird. And now I have to live with it because every day I walk down there, I see all this crazy graveyard of formerly living trees. And here on the 1-year anniversary, roughly, of the COVID-19 pandemic, this is early middle March, when a year ago in 2020, we all became increasingly aware that something bad was happening. And now a year later, and you've seen all the news reports, of course, a lot of journalists are reflecting on this past year. And maybe you saw President Biden on TV yesterday giving his address and the relief bill that was passed and so on. There's a lot cooking right now, yeah? And so I can't help but connect the two things. That here today we are acknowledging the deaths of today. On some websites I see it's 535,000. Other websites have 545,000, somewhere in that range, American dead in this last year from COVID-19. That's more dead, as President Biden said yesterday, than all the Americans who died in World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, and 9/11. You put all those together, 535 or so thousand dead. That's more than are buried at Arlington Cemetery. And how many have tested positive for COVID? 29 million people have gotten this disease that we know of. 29 million. Many of them became symptomatic. Many of them still struggle months and months later with debilitating symptoms. We don't know what the lifelong symptoms are of, what the lifelong effects of COVID infection are. So all of that is on my mind. And again, if you need a number to kind of, or a reference for what 29 million is, that's every man, woman, and child in Texas. Here in California, we have 39 million people, so that doesn't quite correspond. But I'm sure by the time this thing is over, we'll get to 39 million. So I have the same initial reaction to that as I do to this guy who broke these trees off for no reason. You know, when I think about that number of 530,000, let's go with the low number, 530,000 dead in this 1 year, a staggering, unprecedented epidemiological disaster. And someone is putting in the chat that she just lost her brother this last week. It is, when you bring it down to the singular loss like that, hearing Elizabeth Warren on TV talking a couple of nights ago about losing her brother, who no one could be with. And it just, I guess I'm just exhausted from being so brokenhearted. And I don't know what to do with all this grief and frankly, anger. And so that's my first gaze, right? That's my first response is, it pisses me off. It didn't have to be this bad. Look at how quickly we're turning things around with different policy at the federal level and different leadership. And don't worry, don't panic. I'm not going to go down a political trail here. Nothing more needs to be said about that. It's kind of obvious, right? But I can't help but be angry that the number could have been cut in half, cut by 75% if different things had been done early on. So I get mad. And I don't know what to do with that. That's curious to me, that my first glance, my first gaze at these COVID numbers, and my first gaze at the tree murderer of Lake Murray is the same. Resentment. I want to manage it. I want to fix it. I want to take over. I know what to do. You know, ego rushes in and wants to attack, assault, efface, change directions, take over. Completely natural response, by the way. And I'm struck by something that I read a couple of months ago, back in January, in the Richard Rohr Center for Action and Contemplation daily newsletter. A lot of you get this newsletter, and I've talked to a number of you about it. Richard Rohr, R-O-H-R. If you don't know him, write that down. Richard Rohr, R-O-H-R. He's a Franciscan friar, a priest, but a kind of an outlier. I don't know if he's a Catholic in good standing anymore because of all the kind of global mysticism that he teaches. He seems more interested in Eastern traditions, but he's deeply rooted. He would say that he's still deeply tried and true, deeply rooted in his Franciscan tradition. And he has a center there in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Great daily newsletter. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, totally go to just Google Richard Rohr and sign up on the Center for Contemplation and Action, or Action and Contemplation. You'll find it. But I'm going back to one of his newsletters from January, because it really helped me. And I think it's going to help us right now. So I just want to read a couple of bits from his newsletter. It's about a phrase I've been using already this morning: first gaze and second gaze. Yeah. This is what Richard Rohr says, as a contemplative now, as a monk, right? He writes, even after 50 years of practicing contemplation, my immediate response to most situations includes attachment, defensiveness, judgment, control, and analysis. I am better at calculating than contemplating. Check, me too. I bet a lot of you are. And then he goes on, the false self seems to have the first gaze on almost everything. And he'll define that a little bit better in a second. First gaze, second gaze. He goes on my better days, when I am open, undefended, and immediately present, I can sometimes begin with a contemplative mind and heart. But most of the time, I can get there later and even end there, but it is usually a second gaze. The true self seems always to be ridden and blinded by the defensive needs of the separate self. It is an hour by hour battle, at least for me. I can see why all spiritual traditions insist on some form of daily prayer or meditation. In fact, morning, midday, and evening would be a good idea. Otherwise, we can assume that we'll fall right back in the cruise control of small and personal self-interest, the pitiable and fragile smaller self. The first gaze is seldom compassionate, he says. It is too busy weighing and feeling itself. How will this affect me? How does my self-image demand that I react to this? How can I get back in control of the situation? This leads to an implosion of self-preoccupation that cannot enter into communion with the other or the moment. As soon as I saw that guy snapping those trees, I went into fight mode. I wanted to attack him. I saw him as an enemy. And I felt this insane need to control the situation and to come to the defense of these defenseless trees. Rohr goes on, it has taken me much of my life to begin to get to the second gaze. All right. So the first gaze is all ego and reactivity and the need to control and anger and rage, no compassion, no presence in the moment, no connection to the other, enemy, attack. But how do we get to the second gauge? He says, by nature, I have a critical mind and a demanding heart, and I am impatient. And these are gifts and curses, in different times, he says. Yet I cannot have one without the other. They are both good teachers. The practice of solitude and silence allows them both and leads to the second gaze, the gaze of compassion. Looking out at life from the place of divine intimacy is really all I have and all I have to give, even though I don't always do it. In the second gaze, critical thinking and compassion are finally coming together. It is well worth waiting for because only the second gaze sees fully and truthfully. It sees itself, the other, and even God with God's own eyes. And if you don't like the God word, if you're an atheist or whatever, don't worry about it. Just stay with me. He's a Catholic. He's going to say God, right? The eyes of compassion, which always move us to act for peace and justice. As always, both and, he says. So I think about that second gaze, how difficult it is to get to the second gaze. The great Zen Buddhist teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, who I've been doing a deep dive on lately as well as I prepare the next units for my Southwestern College classes on Buddhism. And Thich Nhat Hanh, I dug up a video online of him being interviewed by Oprah Winfrey on her show, right? Super Soul Sunday. I don't know if it's still on. The video, this video is from 2013. So Oprah Winfrey talking to Thich Nhat Hanh, and she's asking all the right questions as she always does. And he says that, he talks about deep listening and deep presence and deep compassion. It's the second gaze in Richard Rohr's terminology. To get to that, to get out of me and my anger and my righteousness and my wanting to fix it, and who should I be angry at, and then I feel like I've accomplished something by identifying the perpetrator. And he says, no, instead think about your enemy and imagine sitting with them, whoever that is for you, and saying, I know that you are suffering. I can feel it. I know that you are suffering. Tell me about your suffering. I don't want you to suffer. I don't want to be the cause of your suffering. Tell me about your suffering, and I'm just going to deeply listen. I'm not going to offer solutions. I'm not going to try to fix it. I'm going to let you share with me where you hurt. Thich Nhat Hanh did an amazing thing once. This is some years ago. He led a workshop in Israel. And he got a whole group of Israeli high school kids, Jewish Israeli high school kids together with another whole group of Palestinian Muslim Arab kids from Gaza. And he got them all in a big room, these Israeli Jewish kids and these Palestinian Muslim kids. And he said, okay, we're going to have this 3-day conference. And on the first day, we're all going to get together, and the Palestinians will sit on one side and the Israeli kids will sit on the other. And today, the first day, only the Palestinian kids get to talk. And the Israeli kids, you're just going to listen. And the Palestinian kids are going to talk about what it's like to live in Gaza, to have Israeli airships blow up your school, blow up your grandmother and grandfather in their home. And the fear of living next to one of those a very powerful American-supported militarized states on earth, the nation of Israel, and to have those bombs raining down in your neighborhoods and have Israeli assassins undercover roaming your streets. Tell us about your suffering. And then Thich Nhat Hanh said, the next day we're going to change roles. So the next day, the Palestinian kids just listened, and the Jewish kids got a chance to talk about what it's like to live in Tel Aviv and to have missiles rain down, Hamas missiles, to hear the sirens, to know that in Israel there is compulsory military service, that every boy and every girl, when they get out of high school, by compulsion, joins the military, goes to boot camp, learns how to kill, learns how to rifle, gets their rifle training, has to live in a constant state of military lockdown because they are surrounded by enemies. And they got to just open their hearts to these Palestinian kids. And on the third day, everybody could talk. And Thich Nhat Hanh said, by the time we got to the third day, there had been so much conscious presence with the suffering of the other that suddenly there were no others. There were just kids trying to live their lives, sick and tired of their father's wars, sick and tired of having their childhoods robbed from them by violence and fear and poverty. And it was a profoundly moving thing to hear, to build exercises that get to that second gaze. I was walking around the lake this morning. Lori and I, of course, every day are down there. And I want to tell you about what I saw. So that incident with the tree murdering guy, that was a few months ago. And walking around this lake this morning, what did I see? I saw all of those broken trees, every single one of them, sprouting new, beautiful, deep red branches and leaves right below the horrible gaping, gashing wound where the trunk had been snapped off. Right below that, a whole cluster of these beautiful, soft, gentle, damp, red leaves and branches were growing. These trees are not dead. They have been grotesquely, bizarrely pruned. And they are springing back to life. They're growing 10 feet from a lake. They have good water source in their roots. And here comes spring again. And it just anchored in me. It embodied in me the irrepressible quality of life. Just as we, as a society, not just in America, but around the world, are tentatively allowing ourselves to be slightly hopeful about what's going to happen these next few months, where we'll be on the 4th of July. President Biden said, if we're lucky and if we get enough vaccination, maybe we'll get to gather in backyards and have a normal 4th of July. Maybe we'll have all the kids back at school this fall. There is great cause for optimism when we look at the declining numbers of deaths, the declining numbers of hospitalization. Are some states opening too soon? Of course, in my opinion, because I agree with Dr. Fauci and the science, of course I think that. But those are the details, right? The big picture is that life is irrepressible. And while we will never stop grieving for those we lost and feeling just a tang of anger still at the grotesque unnecessariness of those deaths. So many of them could have been prevented with more federal coordination. But we know that life, capital L, is birthless and deathless. That individual forms like me are going to come and go. This is what the great wisdom traditions teach us. This is the eternal life promise of the Western traditions. This is the Sanatana Dharma of the Hindu tradition, the birthless and deathless truth. Or as Eckhart Tolle puts it in his little book, Stillness Speaks, life is not the opposite of death. The opposite of death is birth. Life has no opposite. That there is something in us, in our nature, in our sacred nature, that is by its nature expansive, regenerative, abundant, infinite. And I feel this, especially now in the last years of my life. Now, I'm fine. It's not like I'm dying or anything, but I'm 62 and most of my life is behind me. And many of you on this call are in your 60s and 70s and 80s and beyond. You know what I'm talking about. We've had a great run and we don't get to live forever. And maybe I'll have 25 more years. Maybe I'll have 25 more minutes. I have no idea. No one knows. And so what I feel increasingly in these middle late years is this idea of timelessness and formlessness underneath the surface of all of the coming and going that we necessarily experience. I want to share with you a poem about some of that. It's called The Wish to be Generous by Wendell Berry. The Wish to be Generous by Wendell Berry. All that I serve will die. All my delights, the flesh kindled from my flesh, garden and field, the silent lilies standing in the woods, the hill, the whole earth, all will burn in man's evil or dwindle in its own age. Let the world bring on me the sleep of darkness without stars, so I may know my little light taken from me into the seed of the beginning and the end, so I may bow to mystery and take my stand on the earth like a tree in a field, passing without haste or regret toward what will be. My life, a patient, willing descent into the grass. The Wish to be Generous by Wendell Berry. One more poem, since these are both short. This is from a favorite poet here at Friday Reflections, Fred Lamotte. This is a collection of his. This is from a collection of his called Savor Eternity. I want to make sure I name the poets and the poems so that you go out and buy some poetry books. Trying to sell some poetry, people. So this is by Fred Lamotte. It's called Gentle, and I'll leave you with this. A gentler world begins in the way you touch your heart. Be soft with the light inside you. Caress your body with this breath. God is nothing else but the place where the sun comes up in your chest. You are the glimmering destination. You are the golden honey daubed on the bread of the ordinary. Whatever is perfect, whatever is heavenly, begins here. Thank you, my friends. Appreciate you spending this time with us. See you next Friday at Friday Reflections. Peace.